The era of former President Donald Trump saw significant shifts in U.S. economic policy, with widespread debates over its impact on income inequality. While the Trump administration focused on tax cuts, deregulation, and trade policies, these changes had varying effects on different segments of the population. Many analysts argue that financial inequality worsened during this time, with the wealth gap between the rich and the poor continuing to grow. In this video, we explore the top 10 indicators of financial inequality during the Trump era, shedding light on the key areas where disparity became most pronounced. 1. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. One of the most notable policies during the Trump administration was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA, of 2017. While proponents argued that the tax cuts would stimulate the economy, critics pointed out that the benefits were disproportionately tilted towards the wealthy. The top 1% of earners received the largest percentage of tax breaks, while the middle and lower income brackets saw only modest reductions. This regressive distribution of tax relief increased the wealth gap and deepened financial inequality. 2. Stagnant wage growth for the working class. Despite a strong economy in certain sectors, wage growth for the working class remained sluggish throughout the Trump era. According to various reports, while the stock market soared and corporate profits increased, the average American worker saw little improvement in their paychecks. For many, real wages, adjusted for inflation, barely budged, leaving low-income earners struggling to keep up with rising costs of living. 3. Rising wealth of the top 1%. Under the Trump administration, the wealth of the top 1% grew significantly, further exacerbating financial inequality. The stock market's record highs benefited those with substantial investments in equities, which disproportionately benefited the wealthiest Americans. These gains were largely inaccessible to the lower and middle classes, who hold a much smaller share of their wealth in the stock market. As a result, the wealth gap continued to widen, with the rich growing richer and the rest of the population facing limited financial mobility. 4. Corporate profit growth versus worker compensation. During the Trump years, corporate profits surged, but worker compensation didn't keep pace. A growing trend of shareholder-driven capitalism meant that profits were largely used for stock buybacks, dividends, and executive bonuses, rather than increasing wages for the average worker. While the corporate sector thrived, wage growth for many employees remained stagnant, contributing to an increasing divide between business owners and their workers. 5. Deregulation and its impact on workers. The Trump administration's push to reduce government regulations had a mixed effect on inequality. While deregulation helped large corporations and industries, it often came at the expense of workers' rights and protections. The rollback of regulations in sectors such as labor rights, environmental protections, and financial services primarily benefited big businesses and wealthy elites, but left lower-income workers vulnerable to exploitation, poor working conditions, and lower wages. 6. Housing market disparities. The housing market saw significant price increases during the Trump era, but these rises were largely beneficial to homeowners and real estate investors, groups typically with higher incomes and greater assets. For renters and first-time homebuyers, especially in major cities, rising property prices became an insurmountable barrier to homeownership. As a result, the divide between those who owned homes and those who didn't grew wider, further deepening financial inequality. 7. Student loan debt crisis. The student loan debt crisis continued to escalate during the Trump administration, with many young Americans facing overwhelming debt burdens. The lack of significant policy action to address this issue, coupled with rising tuition costs, left a generation of students saddled with debt, hindering their financial independence and upward mobility. Meanwhile, wealthier families with access to better educational resources were often able to avoid these debt burdens, exacerbating the divide between socioeconomic classes. 8. Wealth inequality in healthcare access. Under Trump's leadership, efforts to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, ACA, created uncertainty in the healthcare system, leaving millions of Americans with limited access to affordable health insurance. While wealthier individuals were able to afford private healthcare plans, many low-income families struggled to access quality care. The disparity in health outcomes, driven by unequal access to healthcare, became a significant indicator of broader financial inequality, with poorer Americans bearing the brunt of inadequate healthcare coverage. 9. Immigration policies and economic disparities. Trump's stance on immigration had a direct impact on financial inequality, particularly among immigrant communities. Policies such as the public charge rule and the reduction of refugee admissions disproportionately affected low-income immigrants who were seeking better economic opportunities in the U.S. These policies created additional barriers to financial independence, limiting access to social services, employment, and other resources, thereby widening the gap between immigrants and native-born citizens in terms of wealth accumulation. 10. Trade wars and their impact on low-income Americans. The trade wars initiated during the Trump era, particularly the tariffs imposed on China and other countries, had mixed effects on the economy. While some industries benefited from protectionist policies, many U.S. consumers faced higher prices for everyday goods, particularly in sectors like electronics, apparel, and agriculture. Low-income households, who spend a larger portion of their income on consumer goods, were disproportionately impacted by these price increases. Meanwhile, wealthier individuals, who typically spend a smaller portion of their income on these goods, were less affected, exacerbating financial inequality. The Trump era was marked by policies that, while beneficial to some segments of the population, contributed to widening financial inequality. From the regressive effects of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to the stagnation of wages for workers, the gap between the rich and the poor grew significantly. While corporate profits soared and the stock market hit record highs, everyday Americans, particularly those in lower income brackets, found themselves facing rising costs in housing, healthcare, and education, with limited upward mobility. Understanding these indicators of financial inequality is crucial for addressing the systemic issues that continue to affect millions of Americans in the years ahead.